We have a comment in the Jamboard. Any other thoughts?
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay. I'll share a couple thoughts. When I read that and look at my role, I believe it's to represent um, local implementing agencies viewpoint, um, evidence-based home visiting um, viewpoint, and then also I think the area that I live, so I'm in central Washington and live in a rural county. So um, making sure that voice is heard, living in a county that is vast and that much of it is the Yakima Reservation. So also um, representing that is really important to me. And I think because I've been doing this a long time, that I have a responsibility to be open to new ideas and thoughts and other ways of looking at things, but also that um, that the wisdom that I have um, is also valued.
Thank you for that, Marilyn. I think they're very similar thoughts to the ones that you've shared, seem to also be coming up on the Jamboard. Um, any other thoughts that we'll want to share verbally or in the Jamboard? Yeah, so- Mm, mhm. So it just from what's been shared verbally and just looking at the chat, it seems like there's a shared of understanding of the roles and of your role as a member of HVAC. So it really is to do a lot of the things that have been talked about, um, to bring kind of your expertise into this space, and that's your expertise from kind of your job standpoint. It's also could be expertise that you hold that's kind of out of work realm. It's to kind of also bring the voices of the communities that you live in, the communities that you work in, um, into this space. To help kind of support strategic planning, to help kind of support the distribution of funds, to help support. So just wanted to check in and make sure that that was kind of the same. We were sharing kind of the same thoughts, and people had the same understanding when they look at that legislation about your role within HVAC. So again, just want to give a couple more minutes to see if there are any other thoughts, and then we'll move on to some other questions that are on this particular slide. Any kind of other last thoughts as you think about your roles? Um, can also think about a little bit with the unique position, those of you who are local implementing agency kind of representatives that can have sometimes a challenging role within this space, because the hope is that you are thinking kind of more broadly about the experience of LIAs within the HVSA, It could also be that you're thinking kind of more broadly about a specific model perspective. And that's what we're hoping for majority of the time as LIA representatives that you would bring into the space. I think the other piece is there are times where your very kind of specific LIA role also makes sense depending on what it is that we're talking about. So it's that ability to kind of move from really low level boots on the ground to kind of a higher thinking about LIAs in general, or thinking about kind of the model perspective in general. So I know that that can be kind of a hard space and a hard thing to navigate. So really just wanted to kind of share that too in this space. Um, any other thoughts that have come into the Jamboard? Give me a second, I'm gonna look in here. Yeah, yeah. So as you think about roles, is there a place where you feel that there is some additional clarity that's needed, or something you're unsure of, or just want to talk more about or understand more about? I love that, Christy. That's a significant and important role as well. Thank you for sharing that. So are there places where you think there's more clarity needed about your role, or as you think about so as you think about your role within HVAC, or as you think about kind of HVAC's role within the HVSA? So thinking kind of more on your level and then thinking more broadly on the um, committee level as a whole.
Hi, Nelly. This is Adrian. Um, I think the part th- that I think it's important for me that when I read, for example, the HVAC main goal, the distribution of funding investments, it 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 really uh, stopped me on thinking on the home visiting field as a state instead of just DCYF only. So that part, it will be great to really clarify, are we moving the whole home visiting field? Are we thinking of the entire home visiting field? Like, for example, no, and I don't mean that everyone needs to be in this table, but when we're making decisions, are we thinking also how that will impact the rest of the field? You know, and are we thinking on that? That's the part that sometimes makes me a little bit like, well, what's my role here? Because I'm not a partner funded through DCYF, right? But I'm a local implementer of other type of home visiting, from the same PAT to nurse family partnership to early head start to community design program. So that part sometimes gets to me like, well, are we just advising on the investment that DCYF it's doing, or should we thinking on the rest of the field as an entire system, Hope that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, Adrian, and thank you for bringing that up. I would love to hear kind of other members' thoughts about what Adrian has said, and then we can kind of think about our DCYF and kind of systems response to that. But I would love to hear from others first before we kind of chime in. And Lee, the question was, is there any area where there's additional clarity needed? And when you think about your kind of individual role as a member of HVAC, and as you think about HVAC's role in kind of support and in support of the HVSA. So that was thinking individually and then thinking more about a committee and your role as a committee. So any thoughts about Adrian's points and comments?
Hi, Nellie. I think I'd do a little better if I fumble through a verbal comment. I guess sometimes I'm wondering, just as you know, I think of us as totally like a stakeholder in the community, collaborative, trying to build, you know, the partnerships between home visiting and advocacy and domestic violence programs. So, and listening to being a part of the conversations, I sometimes wonder, could there be more clarity about like what federal limitations you all might have that direct what you're doing in the state, and then what, you know, freedoms or flexibility you have because uh, within the state, you know, like more clarity about like where y'all bumping up against. You can't do this because of federal obligations or requirements, and then where you have more discretion. So sometimes that's not always been as I feel like I'm pretty much an outsider just trying to follow the conversation. That's always not has been clear to me, and but maybe it's clear to everybody else, but that's just something.
Thanks for that, Lee. And I think we can be more explicit about kind of where we have freedoms and where we have some limitations as we make it through different topics within HVAC. Also wanted to circle back to Adrian's kind of points and comments around thinking about HVSA and then thinking more broadly about kind of home visiting. Hold on, just a second. I want to read Marilyn's. Thanks for that, Marilyn. So it's a balancing act between two. So as we think about, DCYF is definitely invested in kind of the broader statewide effort around getting home visiting to areas and places where we know that it's needed. We know that the need exists as we think about kind of expansion, as we think about other opportunities, so it is both. When it comes to funding, we are limited by what it is we're funded to do and the areas we're funded to support. So from a funding standpoint, there are some limitations, but I think that those funding pieces can be influenced and impacted by what's happening at a statewide level. So I think it's a balancing act between the two. And I think there's work that we can do to better think through and better talk about those pieces. So I would not say that we're only invested in what HVSA is funding. From a kind of broader perspective for home visiting, we are limited by funding streams, but not necessarily being influenced by the larger state kind of movement or need as we think about home visiting. And I would invite of our TRIO partners and other DCYF staff who are here to share your perspectives as well. And Adrian, I don't know if that starts to kind of get at what you were talking about. If it doesn't, I would love to hear more, and I could clarify a little bit more too.
No, it does. And you know what and part of why I also mention it, it's, you know, it's sometimes we have so many constraints in the time that we have, and we sometimes only focus on the funding piece and not on the system piece. So that's the part that, you know, should we be having some time where we talked about the system piece and how are we moving that part, you know, and then the policies that we're, you know, making sure that it's happening. You know, that yes, DCYF doesn't have more funding, but how do we push the system in other areas that will really help the families that we serve? And that's the part that maybe it's a, you know, it is implicit in what we do, but I think sometimes we intentionally are not talking about that, and how as a group and because I think we are a powerful group that I think could move a lot of things in the state. And I think sometimes we need to have the voice out of this group in the sense of, do we support something specifically that maybe we should be saying something about, you know? That's the part that sometimes I get like, well, the HVAC seems to be a great and amazing group that could be pushing, you know? And I think that's something that sometimes I'm missing on how we can support other groups also that are happening at the same time. That's the part that I get like, well, do we want to do that, instead of just our piece of the funding opportunities.
Those are great points, Adrian, and more kind of food for thought. And I would love to kind of hear some additional thoughts about that, and also kind of hold that for our planning piece, because I think that also sits really well as we think about kind of how we want to use our time and how we want to dedicate our time over this next state fiscal year. What do we want to focus on? What do we want to spend time doing? And that could be a significant part of that discussion as well. So thanks for bringing that up, Adrian. And I think it is important to spend some time thinking systemically about home visiting and where HVAC could have some influence. Any other areas where clarity is needed? I'm not.
Hi Nelly, this is Adrian again. Sorry, I have some
No,
CNAils, and it's
please.
this part is, and I wanna be mindful. I know and I understand because I'm in the same position. DCYF staff, you old staff, DOH staff. All of you. I know we know that you are, in between us and, of course, for example, leadership with DCYF and DOH, right? And I know that sometimes navigating that, it can be very difficult because maybe you want to do something completely radical, but then leadership don't support you as a staff member. And I wonder is as an HBAC, if as a group us, and I don't mean implying you using you, but us as an HBAC, for example, I know that we were having talking about the rates setting, right? And we may do something about it, like to learn how it's working, is it not working? And I know that it can be difficult for you all staff at DCYF and DOH to go back to leadership and say it's not working. But it may be completely received different if the HBAC as a team says, the impact of doing the rating, it worked or it didn't work. But I know that I would not want to put you in a position that you have to defend us. But how do we as an HBAC, we as a team, as a group, say something about it, that is not coming from you? Because sometimes, to put you in that position, I don't think it's fair. But can we as a group say, DCYF, that didn't work at all? Should we write it down? Should we send an email? Should we send a document saying that rate was amazing? That's the part that sometimes I get like, can we do that? Should we do that? But I think it's something that us as a group, it's something that, do we want to do that? Because we're expressing all the time, you all, what we feel. But I know it could be difficult for you to again translate this to the leadership, and who is making the decision at the end. So just wondering about that part. And Nelly, this is not a question for you all staff. It's more for us, the rest of us, HBAC members. Like, is that something that we want to do in the future? We did recommendations in the past, and many of them worked, but then some of them didn't work, and we received a completely different approach. And then should we have said something, sending back like, okay, we recommended this. Why you're changing it? Hope that makes sense.
So this is Nina, and I just wanted to ask or just mention that Start Early is also part of the trio. And so I hear conversation about DOH and DCYF, which are state government agencies, but Start Early is our state private public partner. So I want to like be inclusive of how we talk about our work and how we are represented here by the trio as far as HVAC work. And but I also wanted to say that or what I'm kind of wondering, we are a body of people that sit and on different committees and different community perspectives, some statewide, some within this, some role or sector wise. And so I'm wondering how folks on this call that maybe sit in multiple places think about how we can better integrate our perspectives. And I think that that's a piece of the how do we address the whole state that we're often not part of, or at least invited to other community tables. And so, so thinking about, is this a place where we can sort of encourage this both this sharing out of other community-based coalitions or advisory committees that are working, so that we are holding the full state perspective and supporting DCYF's, if we're talking about DCYF, supporting the HVAC's capacity to hold a fuller, broader state perspective. So I don't know if that, I kind of got wordy there. I don't know if that made sense, but wanted to throw that into the mix. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Adrian, for sharing your thoughts and additional things for us to look at and consider.
Nellie,
Sure, Erica, go ahead.
apologies. I know it's awkward because I'm on the phone, so I apologize in advance if I've stepped over somebody. I'd like to build on Adrian's comments, and so I'm here representing the Home Visiting Advocacy Coalition, and I think it's always been a little unclear to me who exactly we're advising, right? I consider it DCYF at large, which would include, of course, the home visiting program team, as well as the broader leadership as it comes to decisions. So I just want to weigh in to Adrian's point that, and I don't know how the mechanics of this would happen, but I think I would support, particularly when there are significant programmatic changes and budgetary changes, like, you know, the system is seeing right now, that if there is significant feedback that we as an advisory committee collectively feel is important that we want to provide to DCYF at large, if there was a mechanism to do that, I certainly would. I want to go back to the advocacy coalition, of course, but I would think that they would see this body as that being an appropriate role for this advisory committee, and that it would be advising the department on implications of its decisions. So that's all to say. I'd want to go back to the group, but I think that would be a relevant role for an advisory body, particularly when there's significant changes underway. So thanks for letting me weigh in. And I'll stop talking. Thanks.
No. Erica, thank you. And please feel free to chime in again. I'm sorry, I saw your name on there and I forgot that you were on the phone. So please feel free to chime in when you're able to and when you can. And I think but what you and Adrian have been sharing are things that we've also been thinking about. So I think we're gonna transition to a place where DCYF has a recommendation to make around just what you're talking about in regards to is there what the structure could be like and what that communication could be with DCYF of leadership as we think about it exactly from what you were saying, Erica, a more kind of broad opportunity to provide recommendations and to kind of check in about things or share thoughts and concerns that may come up or ideas that you have. So could you skip 2 slides for me? Advance 2 slides, Emily. Okay. So here's our kind of proposal for a structural shift. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to read the slide. And then I want us to talk through it. So I'm just going to be quiet for a little bit to give you some time to read the slide.
I just had a question. For commitment for 5 to 10 hours, are you meaning a quarter, a month, a year?
Might help if I unmuted first. I would say a month. Well, it's on the months that we have HVAC because we don't have HVAC every single month. But as we're preparing for a meeting, that's what it would be. And it depends on kind of what the topic is and what our focus is for that particular meeting or set of meetings. But thank you for asking that, Allison. I didn't clarify that on the slide. So, HVAC committee members, what are your thoughts about this proposal?
Nellie, can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Is this something that, has this proposal been shared with your leadership?
No, it isn't a proposal that we've shared with leadership. And Eric, I'm curious as to of what your thoughts are about that.
I'm just curious how that mechanically would work in terms of that, how parts of this would interplay. How you see some of this working is all just a question.
Oh, okay.
If I can jump in, this is Emily Morgan. I'm on the community engagement team. We have a similar structure for some of our other advisory groups, like the Early Learning Advisory Council, provider supports. They all have executive committees. So does our parent group. Yeah, I just think that just to share that that's kind of a common structure in our advisory groups at DCYF.
And Emily, do those executive committees like meet with Nicole Rose, or how does that how do they?
Yep, they sometimes meet with Nicole Rose. They regularly meet with their like the people who plan the ELAC meeting. So, you know, like Nellie,
Okay.
and when we do the logistics. But when they request meetings with someone in early learning, people at DCYF are willing to meet with the executive committees to work on what they have questions about. I can't speak for
Okay.
everybody at DCYF, but that's like that structure with ELAC works very well.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
And I don't think we would see the meetings with leadership being something that happens on a regular basis. I think what we're looking at and thinking about is as there are things that come up where recommendations, I think Adrian was talking a little bit about this earlier, where there were some recommendations that may have been made by the committee and the department may have gone a different direction, or it may have been interpreted differently, or so those would be kind of things that we would structure. So it wouldn't be kind of an ongoing as a planning, but as we think about areas where there may be a direct connection needed, so that we're not serving, you know, as the staff for DCYSF are not sending or relaying a message on behalf of the committee. So I would see that more as as needed, not as a regular part of planning.
Gotcha. And one more clarifying question, then I'll stop. Which positions then are you defining as leadership? Is it like Vicky, Dr. Ibarra, Laura? What is the definition of leadership in this instance? Thank you.
And I think it would depend on what we're talking about, because there may be some things that it's really Judy and Laura. There may be some things that it's, you know, Judy and Vicky, who's our division lead, and there may be, you know, I think it just depends on what we're discussing. I don't think we had a specific, like, here's our kind of definition of what leadership is. I think it varies from topic to topic. But I think once you start getting beyond Vicky, it gets a little bit more challenging to organize and kind of do schedules. So that would be, then we'd have to look and see from that perspective. So I would say probably up to Vicky, and then we would see what needs to be done beyond that point. And Vicky would be a part of that conversation.
And Erica, this is Laura, just to add on to that. I mean, generally the DCYF leadership is seen as the secretary and assistant secretaries, which would be Vicky and Secretary Hunter, of course. And then beyond that would be Judy and myself, but I'm here regularly anyway, so it mostly would be above me.
Thank you for the clarification.
Nellie, I just have a few thoughts that I wanted to kind of just throw out there. And I may have missed this. One thing I was thinking about is if compensation would be an option for members if they were to decide to take on the leadership of chair or co-chair. And then I kind of mentioned this before too, but around like authority, because if a member is stepping in to be a chair or co-chair, it's gonna be really important for them to know where there's areas of influence and where there's not, kind of like what Lee was saying, what are the federal restraints that we have to work with no matter what? So I think kind of like when I asked the question about authority, it's kind of around clarifying that. So you would be able to know as a chair or co-chair where there are options to influence and where there's just not. And then the other thing I was thinking about is if there's a sense that people would want to move forward with this, I think also like the clarification on what specifically would be the staffing support and what would be places where a member that would opt into being a chair or co-chair, kind of like really delineating those roles basically between staffing of this compared to coming in and trying to help influence the agendas. Lots of questions. Thank you for bringing this up.
But I think just to your question of authority is a good one. I do think it would be a learning over time. I don't know if that's something that could be explicitly provided right away, but I think it would be kind of clarifying over time because the statute is fairly, like, there's 2 sentences, right? And so all other things would be learned over time, I think.
Any other thoughts or questions about this proposal?
Nellie, this is Marilyn again, and I support this. I agree, like more clarification would be helpful for, the person who would choose to do that. But I feel like we have history of doing that, like with our subcommittees. We have, co-chairs that are part of LIAs or, HVAC committee. So I think that we have precedent for that, and I think it would, I think it would strengthen, enrich the relationship between, DCYF as part of the HVAC and then us. So yeah, I support this.
Thanks for that, Marilyn. And Allison, I saw your emoji of support there. And Liv, you bring up a lot of good points, and I think there'll be a lot of this that would be also kind of structured and created with whoever these 2 individuals are that that are in this role. So, and Cassie, we haven't built this out that far. So I mean, we have some historical pieces and some other kind of boards that we could look like, advisory and committee boards within DCYF, and could pull from that. And on average, it typically is about 2 years. And so we could think through, does that make sense for HVAC? Do we want to do something shorter? Do we want to do something longer? So I think those are some of the other more specific details that we would need to kind of work out and work on if we were going to move forward with this proposal.
Thanks for sharing that. I was just going to say, I've been a part of some groups where like the role of co-chair rolls into being the role of the chair over time. And my sense is that that really sets people up for success.
I agree with that, Cassie, and thanks for bringing that up, because I think there are at least one of the other committees that I'm aware of within advisory committees within DCYF that do something similar to that, where then it does leave an opportunity for there to be some onboarding over a period of time, so that it does kind of transition people into those roles and they feel successful of moving forward. So that's definitely something to consider, and I love that idea. Thanks for sharing, Cassie. So what we were going to do is do a poll on this, just to get a feel for where people are. The expectation was not that we would be identifying the 2 individuals today, or anything along those lines, but more so, here's the proposal. Do we want to move forward with it or not want to move forward with it? And if the decision is to move forward, then we would start to do some of the things that we were talking about, build this out a little bit more, put in additional information for the individual or individuals that would be in that role, these roles, and of work towards kind of having this a little bit more fleshed out. So we are going to launch a poll here. I think if you move on to the next, you a couple of minutes. And if there is an other, I would ask that, because what we forgot to put on here is abstaining. So if you abstain or want to abstain, you could use the other function. Now, if you're using other and have a different idea, I would ask if you could just share with us what your idea is. And again, it's just voting for HVAC members. So those of us who are TRIO staff, please refrain from voting. So we'll leave this open here and then we'll check in on it. So please take a moment or two to vote. Emily, I did not track how many members we have here. So when we could look at that, and when everybody who would like to vote has had an opportunity to vote, we can close the poll. So we'll leave it open for a little bit longer. And again, for those of you who are saying other and you have a different idea, if you're comfortable sharing that idea, but if you are abstaining, other is the other option. Sorry, I forgot to include that as Emily was building the polls, to put in a abstain from voting. So Dila, I see your chat. I think compensation is also something we would need to explore. So I think there's more, and I appreciate gathering kind of additional information for us to think about as we move forward with this. Would not have a response for that today, but definitely something that we can talk about and kind of explore what that would look like. And then sorry, go ahead, Dila.
I'm
Maybe going
sorry,
to answer what I was thinking.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think it would be difficult for someone to be in the co-chair role who's also funded by the HVSA. I think that is a complex piece to navigate, which is why I could see Start Early having expertise and also some level of neutrality to be able to play that role. And I guess in some ways, I'm not sure. It seems like that should be a good use of their time up to now. So I don't know. I think that's the part that I find a little complex about the structure you're proposing.
So, Dila, I just want to be sure that I understand what you mean. So when you're saying a Start Early should play this role, are you recommending or suggesting Start Early be one of the co-chairs, or one of the either a chair or co-chair, or was there a different proposal that you had? Just wanted to be sure I was clear.
Yeah, I would be that specific to say I think it should be a group like Start Early, or another organization that's within this group that plays a role of guiding other home visiting programs, but maybe isn't one that's also directly funded by the HVSA. I think it just creates, it's not an even playing field to be someone who's funded and also be in a position of leadership. The reality is, so you're making recommendations against a funder. That's not and so there are a few people in this room who don't have to worry about their funding and also can make recommendations to this group. And Start Early is one of them. I mean, I know Start Early also gets funding, but for more global leadership level things.
And I just want to say, Dila, thanks for raising that. we are totally open to rethinking and continuing to carry the discussion forward. Obviously, historically, we really had played more of a leadership role in the HVAC and then have decided over time to make some shifts. But I 100% understand what you're saying and would be more than willing to carry on that conversation and think about what that's like structure or setup could look like. Thanks for raising it.
Thank you, Dilla, for talking through of what you were thinking. I just wanted to be sure I landed in the same place and I was walking away with the same understanding that you were intending to share. So I appreciate that. We're going to go ahead and close the poll. And it looks like we have a significant number of people who said, let's move forward with this. I think the next step is between now and our next meeting, we'll work on fleshing out all of these ideas. So really thinking about some of the things that you talked about, terms, and of what supports would be available from kind of a staffing standpoint, all of the kind of pieces around pieces around authority. So we'll work on all of those for our next meeting. And our ask is for you to start thinking about within, again, if it's within our team that we have now, who would be a good kind of co-chair and chair of piece. And we'll talk more about that when we get together here, and we'll decide when that will be as part of our next agenda item. Any other thoughts about this before we take a quick break and then come back and talk through our scheduling for state fiscal year 25?
Are you all able to see the results right now? Okay.
No.
Okay, there's showing up for some people. Okay, we got 14 votes for yes and 2 votes for other. So 16 votes total.
Okay. So let's take a 6-minute break. It's 11:04. Let's come back at 11:10. Okay, so get up, stretch, do what you need to. We'll be back at 11:10. All right, it is 11:10. And so if you can let me know that you're back, either by turning your camera off if that works for you, or an emoji or something in the chat that says I'm here, I'm back, I'm present, that would be appreciated. Again, thank you all for great conversation about the first half of our meeting. Appreciate how engaged and participatory everybody's been. So the Jamboards will stay live. So as you think about things, please feel free to put them in there. We're going to use that to help kind of guide where we're going for kind of our planning for next year and our conversation to support the chair co-chair structure. So we're going to jump into SFY25 meeting planning. Next slide, please, Emily. So over 2024, we at the beginning of our at the beginning of the last state fiscal year, we listed some topics that we wanted to kind of cover over this next year. So this slide just shows you what we were able to kind of get to and get through. So all of the ones that are in black font are things that we were able to kind of make it through this last state fiscal year. So just want to encourage some thinking about topics. There's some things that are going to kind of be reoccurring. So the budget and HVA fund balance is something that we continue to do. You know, we'll continue to talk about kind of expansion as we move forward. That is kind of an ongoing. HVSA data reporting will also kind of be ongoing. So there'll be some things that we'll kind of piece into, but if there are other things that you've been thinking about that would be great, I think this is also where some of what Adrian was talking about in regards to thinking system level. So want to encourage you to think about those pieces today and then beyond today as we get into our meetings for this state fiscal year. So just wanted to bring up that slide as a point of reference. Move to the next slide, please, Emily. So we've had this slide in a couple of our, I think the last two meeting slide decks. I think time just didn't allow us to go into them kind of in depth. So this is what we're proposing. Because of where we are right now, as in August, we would not be able to kind of facilitate an in-person meeting in October. That time frame is really short for us to locate a space and then for our community engagement team to really support moving that forward. So with travel arrangements, with kind of all of the planning that comes with in-person. So we suggested 2 times, a little bit later in the year, but I just want to give you a minute or two to look at this schedule, and we can talk through kind of whether the in-person kind of meetings work, or if you want to think about something differently for in-person. So just give you a couple minutes here, and then we can touch bases on the slide. So any thoughts about the schedule? All right, it doesn't seem like there of any thoughts. So this is another place where we're gonna just launch a poll so that we can document that people had an opportunity to look at it, and we're moving forward with this. So we're not moving forward with it. So we didn't put an other here either, Emily, sorry. I keep forgetting that we need to have a space for people.
Sorry, the in-person date on February 20th, I might be, that's the midwinter break for a lot of people right after the
Okay.
3-day weekend.
Mhm.
So I don't know how much you want to weigh that in potentially affecting attendance. But I think that break is even more consistent than spring break, for example,
Okay.
for
Well,
folks.
thank you for mentioning that, Kate. So maybe we can do some thinking about the in-person portion. And if it gets a little bit too complicated, we could do one meeting in person next year. Any other kind of thoughts or concerns or things to consider? That concerns doesn't sound right. Things to consider is what I meant.
Nellie, I was thinking about our last in-person over on the east side and how we were in the middle of working with Nina and all of a sudden it was like we're looking at our watches and raced to the airport.
Mm-hmm.
So whether or not maybe 4 hours maybe needs to be a little bit longer, or I mean, it was kind of an abrupt like, whoa, drop
Mhm.
everything, go. And I would imagine that the flip side for everybody from the east coming to the west, that it could be that kind of thing too. When you've made that investment of doing the travel, then to
Mhm.
make sure we get the work done.
Okay. Thank you, Chrissy. That's something
Mhm.
definitely worth looking at and considering. And maybe we can talk about, so this is what we do. So then the general schedule, and maybe we can discuss kind of what in-person meetings make sense and if we want to make some adjustments to our time when we're meeting in person. So I'll pin that for a kind of a conversation, maybe a check-in at our first meeting to see about the schedule now that we've have narrowed it down, nailed it down, like what do we want to do for in-person? Do we want to have all the meetings next year virtually, or do we want to meet in person? So we will just say here, and it's recorded and it'll be recorded in our minutes, that the approval is for the dates and the time, not necessarily the in-person portion, and we'll work on that as a committee to decide kind of what would make sense. All right, so we'll go ahead and close this poll. So we are going to have quite a few polls for this meeting. I should have mentioned that. Yeah,
We had
we said
7
we had.
votes. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
you
go
can-
ahead, Emily.
I was just gonna say, we had 7 votes and they were all for yes. To approving the dates, not necessarily the in-person.
Nellie, sorry, this is really like, it's not about me, but these are actually both the public school breaks. I just don't like, do I vote yes if I know I'll be out of town for one? They seem fine. Sorry, I'm really stuck on the voting on this one, I guess. Or should I have voted? I think your microphone is still off.
Nellie, you're muted.
Thank you, Emily. I was engaging in a whole conversation by myself, to myself. So Katie, I was just, are there 2 dates that you're talking about that align with public school holidays? Is that February and which dates were those? Let me ask that in a different way.
February 20th and April 17th.
Okay.
I mean, the spring breaks are all over and I only have a planned vacation for one of those. So I'm not really saying you should plan around those.
No, but it's good.
What
Yeah,
are
it's
we
good for us to know.
approving? Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
good for us.
fine.
It was the dates.
Yeah.
So what we did was looked around the same time that we had the meetings this year, because it seemed to kind of work for most, and then aligned those with the meetings for the next state fiscal year. And those are, so the ones that don't say in person will all be virtual. They'll be recorded. So if you're unable to make a meeting due to, and a variety of things come up, just let us know so that we know that you're not going to be here in case there may be things that need to be voted on. And we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to do that, or that we make sure that you get information if for a meeting that you're unable to attend. But thank you for that, Kate. It's good for us to know what challenges may come up with the schedule. So I appreciate you sharing. Okay, so that wraps up the first half of our agenda. And so we're going to move into kind of our expansion piece for the last 40 minutes that we're together. And there'll be kind of some additional polls in this specific space. And I think those ones do have other, which we'll be sure to make sure that the next polls, when we do polls, that we have an opportunity for people to also vote to abstain or not vote at all. So I think this is where I hand off to Renee for a little bit, and then we do our kind of our dance back and forth. But I think you are starting this section off, Renee, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so we're gonna do a kind of a combination of let you know what's going on with our expansion work, and then there's a lot of kind of overlap or integration with the SB 6109 expansion as well. So and this is so this first section around expansion is really to let you know what's happening based on the input we received from you all in prior meetings, and just give you a little bit of a heads up. So on kind of the steps. So we can go to the next slide, please. Just as a reminder, these are general fund state dollars, about $1 million, not about, it is $1 million. And we're going to use that obviously to fund the 9 models that the HVSA currently funds. The way we're using the dollars is to set aside about 200 to 250K for startup. So we'll run a startup procurement alongside an expansion. And so basically, however, whatever ends up getting funded in that startup up to 250K, then the balance of that will go towards expansion of currently HVSA funded programs. And for sure that the slots are all going to be kind of contingent on the model rate, with the expectation that budgets would align with where we're going with the rate. So go to the next slide, please. So here again, just a reminder of those 9 models. Go to the next slide, please. And here's our timeline. It's all anticipated. We are in the midst right now of doing PAT and NFP rate planning. My hope and pressure on the planning process is that we would have identified rates for NFP and PAT by the end of September. That will then inform kind of the process a little bit, but we're going forward, and we'll have applications and guidance, that kind of thing ready. We're hoping to have that ready to go very early in October. We're aiming for the 1st. We would run bidders webinars within the first couple of weeks to explain everything. Those are usually 2 hours. Then in late October, we would ask our LIAs to tell us if they think they're going to apply, just so that helps us build our review panel and process. In mid-November, we would also do a second set of office hours. It's just really open questions right before the application is due at the end, mid to end of November. End of November. And as a public process, we always allow for questions throughout the process, and we post answers on the webpage about that. We're hoping to then, as you know, do a review of applications in mid-December with a final decision at the end of December. I also meant to introduce April Donges, who you may have heard her voice at the beginning of the meeting. She's a new project staff person working on my team, and she's going to be the project lead on a lot of this work and help us, because we just, bandwidth is pretty limited. So yes, we're very excited to have April on board, and she's super organized, great project manager skills. So you may or may, she's going to be mostly inward facing, but she will be doing a lot of this work. So I think, and so she helped to develop these slides. So thanks, April, for that. Next slide, I think, is just more about process. And again, this is really just to let you know how we do it. It's no change from typical. It's kind of similar. Right now, our procurement steps, we probably should have had this the other way around. We do our planning, and which you are involved in, right? In terms of what the parameters are for any RFA.
Then we write the guidance and application and develop our scoring rubric all alongside each other through September. We do a lot of communication August to December about the whole process, but for sure in September. And then as the thing is released, we do a lot of work on what does the review look like. So once the job for us running a procurement is kind of an ongoing process. We're managing the procurement at the same time we're trying to develop the process for review. I think I've talked about that we have probably 2 to 4 parents who participate on this review panel. Those are folks who've mostly been trained through our ESIP programs, Parent Academy, but we have we've invited, you are all invited to be reviewers, and other state partners, others, so we've had a lot of folks on this advisory committee have been on our review panel, and you're always welcome to be, one of those folks. Usually reviewers for our expansion end up reviewing about 6 to 8 applications and scoring them. We do the review in early December collaboratively as a group, come up with a slate, kind of rank order, and we fund it down that list. So we start with number 1, and then we just keep going until we run out of money in terms of that list that the review panel proposes. We make that recommendation internally to leadership. We do a little bit of a crosswalk about budget and looking at what we have money and what's been proposed to make sure that things align, make sense, are allowable. And then we make an award designation. We anticipate that with this timeline, we'll be able to execute contracts in February. And I look at this, this is going to be a very similar timeline for the SB 6109. I don't think we repeat the slide, so just letting you know. So that's the process. Let's see.
Apologize for interrupting you. This is Eric Halleck. Can I ask a clarifying question, please?
Absolutely. Yes.
I seem to recall it that, thank you very much. And I'm on the road, so my apologies. I seem to recall our last HVAC meeting.
Oh.
All of the money go to expansion.
Erica,
that was my request.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm not sure, Erica, if I understood you. I think what you were saying is you thought all of the money should go to expansion. And I appreciate that. I would love your thinking as a group around that. We have been working with the community in Southwest Washington for startup. There's no pressure to offer. I kind of think of expansion as having 2 definitions, right? We're going to be expanding slots even with a startup. But if you, but it's also a limited expansion can also just be more slots to existing programming. And if the legislative intent was not to do expansion in the terms of startup, I mean, that's, this is a perfect time to make mention of that because we haven't issued anything yet.
I'm sorry, can you hear me a little better right now?
Yes, yeah. But I
was saying,
I don't know if I got your question right because you were completely breaking up, but go ahead.
Yeah, apologies. I recalled from our June meeting that this group recommended not doing startup because of the continued work with rates. So perhaps I'm not recalling correctly. I don't know if other colleagues can help if I didn't recall that. I remember that discussion that we recommended not starting new programs in this time.
So I'm actually super interested in what people, I 100% agree, Erica. We did have a conversation about that. I didn't feel like there was a firm advice about it. And so I would say that if anything, I'm kind of being responsive to our communities that are doing the exploration planning and not sure, when new dollars might come available. But like I said, I'm going to take my guidance from you all. So I don't think I have a whole setup for that. So
okay, I'll defer to my colleagues. That's how I walked away from that conversation. I thought we had made a recommendation, but perhaps I recalled incorrectly.
Why don't just I'm gonna make a time suggestion. Emily, I don't know if you can help us pull the poll back up from the last meeting, because I do think there were some responses to that in the poll. And then if others can jump in chat to support Erica or refute whatever. And then Renee, why don't you keep going on content? And I'd ask HVAC members to jump in on chat with their recollection. And then Emily, if you can pull the poll back up from that meeting, if we did do that.
Yeah, I want to say I definitely remember exactly what you're saying, Erica. And that was part of the rationale for holding the expansion to being internal. So, and not going outside of the HVSA for just this $1 million, partly because the size is small. And then also because of it's going to be kind of awkward given that we're in such a financial transition point right now this year. So it makes sense. So but that's really all I had to present on expansion was an update. And I appreciate if we need to redirect, I would appreciate that guidance. So, and we can definitely account for that throughout this meeting. I think the next slides are moving into, so we wanted you kind of see the steps and the timeline for SB 6109, because we intend to really do these two procurements all at the same time using the same steps. So let's go to the next slide, and Nellie and I are going to tag team this a little bit more closely. This goal for this part of the presentation is really to share how we've, where we are at in our planning for SB 6109, share our recommendations for our procurement process, and get your feedback on that. So there's a lot more opportunity for a conversation in this section as well. And then Nellie, you have the next slide, which is really the summary of, it's just basically a reminder of what SB 6109 is. And thanks, Erica, for your comments, by the way.
All right, thanks, Renee. Next slide, Emily, please. So I think Renee covered this. For 6109, we just want to, here's what we're going to talk about today. So priority geographic areas, model inclusion, and scope and size of application.
Sorry, I'm looking at a different slide deck. So I have a slide deck I had, you were in charge of the next slide. So you're wondering why I'm asking. Right. Go ahead, yeah.
We just next slide, please.
That's the one.
So just wanted to do a really brief summary on the bill, just so it's, again, fresh in people's minds. So what the HVSA has been charged with is to enter into targeted contracts with existing home visiting programs. And for geographic areas, we're to look at locales with the highest rates of child welfare screened-in intakes. And the focus was serving families experiencing high-potency synthetic opioid-related use disorder. And then we were also charged with kind of providing training specific to substance use disorder for home visitors. And then here it details who is going to be given priority for the home visiting slots. So those are those 3 bullets there. And then the other piece that is not captured here is to come up with a referral process for caseworkers to refer families who meet these targeted contracting home visiting, who meet these criteria within child welfare. So it's families with child protective open cases, families with family assessment response, and then families in voluntary services. Next slide, please. So then we just wanted to review the funding source. So it's general state funds. There's 1.6 million allocated. And even though the slot number was taken out of the final bill, it was initially 150. And when the final bill was passed, there were no slots. We're still working under the expectation that we will serve up to 150 families in this pilot. And as I detailed here, the slots will depend kind of on model. The other piece we had was 250,000 for the home visiting training. So that'll be the other procurement that will go alongside the one for services, is identifying an entity to provide a substance use disorder training for home visitors. And we're working to kind of align that with what caseworkers are getting. Gretchen, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks, Ellie. I just want to confirm, just sorry, based on the last slide. So there isn't any priority for individuals that are pregnant and actively using? Is that it's only related to?
So it's for the child welfare cases, if somebody, you could have an actively using pregnant mom who comes in as a referral and could be put into voluntary services or could be part of family assessment response, depending on the screening, the process, or depending on the risk matrix that intake uses.
So
but
will
it
they,
wasn't explicitly called out in the legislation itself.
okay, I think I'm just concerned because sometimes they won't screen in during pregnancy. You know what I mean? The child
Yes.
is born, and it just seems like that's a population that would be really benefit from having services. The earlier, the better.
Mm-hmm. And there are the instances where I've seen those screen in is if it's a pregnant parent with a child already. So this may be their second or third or however many pregnancies, and there's a concern that's come in, and that's usually how I see that pathway oftentimes come into child welfare. But Gretchen, it is something that we could talk through and think about kind of in the referral process, but there isn't an explicit kind of, we're not explicitly, that's not a priority population, as I should say, within this legislation.
Okay.
I know.
Right.
And then the other piece to highlight again
upstream here, like at some point we have to get further upstream. That's I realize that's not you. It's the legend.
Agreed. No, and we 100% agree with that. Because like you're mentioning, it's why wait until the child is actually here if you could impact the environment that the child is in, literally.
Yeah. Yes, because it is changing the brain chemistry during that pregnancy. So
yes, agreed. And Gretchen, I'm gonna hold that as something that we can, how do we, like, is there an opportunity or place for us to think about, what that means? And there may or they may not be, but I think it's important to, and thank you for highlighting that.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. I think this is you, Renee.
Oh, okay, same. So I guess we actually didn't even change this. I think we had it originally, but I just messed it up. So this is exactly, we're thinking about the same timeline. We're hoping to do everything in as opposed to offsetting, partly because we feel like we need to get going on this, but also try to make things as less confusing as possible, which maybe means more work for some of you. You can be kind of thinking about which or both that you want to apply for funding for. So they are going to be run concurrent. So this slide is the one I already shared about the expansion. And it's just that our aim is to try to take your input today and incorporate that as well into our application process so that it would go out either as part of the same application or an application with the same timeline. You can go to the next slide. And I don't know that if that's just a repeat. Okay. So this slide, I think Nellie and I are going to do together. We looked at the next two slides actually have the same bit of data in it. And what it's showing you, and it doesn't actually have as much data in as it just has, these are the communities by DCYF office with the highest maltreatment ranks for the years 20, 21, and 22. And what you're seeing in the numbers in those columns are the actual rankings. So what we did is there's a whole list, I think it's like 48 DCYF offices that got ranked 1 through 10 in one of those 3 years. This particular page shows you those communities that had a rank in the turquoise color every year in the top 10. So you can say, wow, those communities are seeing lots of child maltreatment rates into offices in these particular communities. Then the purple is they got a rank in 2 of those 3 years. And then the next page, don't go to it, are a much longer list of communities who got a rank in one of those 3 years. So just say these are their areas that the agency would like to prioritize for inclusion and kind of our geographic priority for SB 6109. The one little bit of additional information I have for you here is if it's bolded, and I apologize, it's not super obvious that it's bolded. We have a program in the HVSA funded by DCOF right now, serving that particular catchment area. So you can see who's on this list, and where I have 3 slides of locations, but you start to develop a sense of a lot of very rural areas, because that's what happens when you look at rates. The number below is low, so it pushes those communities when a few incidents happen, it pushes them to the top of the list. We also have some extremely rural communities here with no home visiting services that are funded by DCYF. There may be early Head Start, but I don't actually think there are in those in Ponderay or Asotin. And the other thing I know is I have 6 Stevens County offices bolded, and I know that our home visiting program doesn't serve all of those communities, and I don't know which one it serves. So it's just present in Stevens County. And I'm going to go to the next slide just to kind of give you the whole picture of all of this data. These are the offices where there was at least 1 ranking of child reality. If you go to the next slide, this is where there was at least 1 ranking. Okay, I guess this is not. This is where there's 2. I don't really, maybe you have this slide, Nellie, because I'm not sure what this.
No, I just changed the color. It's the same thing. The yellow was hard to see. So it's the same data. So it's
okay, yeah, sorry. No, that
yeah.
Sorry, we're doing, Nellie and I do this, and we send each other the slides at night. So we're like, this is okay. So they had 2 rankings in this group as well, but the rankings were just lower, or in the case of the purple, 1 ranking. So the teal is another group of communities as well who had 2 rankings. I just organized this by how high or low. And this is, again, it's just the lowest of the highest ranking communities. So because they all still were in the top 10 at some point. And then let me show you one last slide, and then I think what we want to do is hear from you about these priority areas. So again, you can see that a lot of these those areas are very rural communities. And then another priority the agency wanted to put forward was offices referrals where there's disproportionate out-of-home placements for children who are Black, African American, or Native American Indian, Alaska Native families. So you see in these are actually some of our more urban communities where they might not show the same rates that the rural communities do, but they have high numbers because they're large population areas. And these are the communities where we would see more disproportionality in communities for out-of-home placement. So the department recommendation is to be considering these as also high priority communities within this procurement. I'm sorry, there are so many of them that it's hard to figure out a way to present them in a way that's meaningful to you. And one idea is simply to identify the counties, which we've done that in all of these slides, to make a list of counties, and that makes it so we're not necessarily looking at the family has to live in that office catchment area, but it's really in the county and identifying priority counties.
So are there any questions about, this is a ton of data to look at. And to think through. Are there any questions? So there's two pieces of data. So because the file that we received that had the top ranks, the highest number of screened in intakes under the child maltreatment marker was a long list. And so we had to think about how to narrow that down, which is why we decided to focus on the first 10, the top 10, and then within that, looking at 3 years of data just to get a feel for kind of where we may need to kind of prioritize. So that was the first one. And then Vicky, the manager of the director of our division, also was interested in looking at disproportionality. And so this is how we landed up with the 6 offices that had the highest number of out-of-home placement for American Indian and Alaska Native children and Black African American youth. So any questions about these 2 pieces of data?
So oh, sorry. So I had a question, like going back to Gretchen's point. So if we say we focus on the disproportionate number of children of out-of-home placement, it's true in our county as well that the CPS, they don't take a CPS referral until the baby's been born and the damage has been done. But if we're saying we're going to focus on families who this is happening to, then could we go upstream and prevent the injury to the child? So seeing pregnant women based on priority geography.
That's a good question, Marilyn. Let me think about that. And then let's hear from Christy, and then Marilyn, I'll circle back about that.
I just wanted to note that I apologize for this. I should have done this in the slide deck, is written the counties, because it's a little bit more consumable. I just put in the chat what that data represents in terms of counties. And again, it isn't county-based data, but it's where those offices are located, which counties. It's a much smaller number. And then I also put in the counties where the high disproportionality happens. And so there's some, so you can see it's a little bit more consumable. And I apologize, there's not a slide, but go ahead, Christy.
Oh, my question.
Christy, you muted yourself. Sorry.
Well, I just talked to myself as well. So my question was, with the looking at highest out-of-home placements by county, is that specifically related to substance use? Or is this generic highest out-of-homes? Are we looking at just the 6109, or is this for both of this expansion area?
So the data that we're sharing is just specific to 6109. This slide here that's talking about the offices with the highest number of out-of-home placements is the additional layer to 6109 that our division director wanted us to add and consider as a geographic area as well. So it isn't specific to substance use, but there could be substance use disorder individuals grouped within this count.
And,
Laura, were
and
you gonna
Nelly,
offer
just to clarify, that's also the case for the other offices. It's the highest level of intakes, not specific to substance use. There's a number of reasons for that, but part of it is this legislation indicated the highest risk quintile. So it's specific to the legislation, but it's not narrowing down to this population per what the legislative guidance was.
Go ahead, Gretchen.
Sorry, I almost lowered my hand, but I'll go ahead and ask it. So I just want to make sure I understand. Are they, the way it was written, it really was more focused on child maltreatment? They're not looking at like rates of, opioid use, or I don't know, any data around like specific areas where maybe there's higher rates of deliveries where the person's positive or anything like that. Is that correct? It's more just focused on maltreatment.
So the reason we use that marker is it's encompassing of a variety of different. So when a referral comes in, there are different options for what they can be tagged. And so the broader you have that definition, the more likely you are to catch more families and I think it's just being thought about as a way to start kind of identifying geographic areas. So we know if there's a high number of screened in intakes, then there maybe could be aligned with an increased need is what this is trying to do. So there isn't I don't think there's a substance use specific tag in a referral its own. So we had to think about what would broadly encompass as much as possible. And so that's why we use the child maltreatment marker for the data that we were collecting. Hopefully that helps kind of clarify, Gretchen, how we landed on that. Liz?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm gonna
ahead,
drop
Laura.
in the chat, Nellie, the prevention dashboard link for everyone, which does have some specific data around substance use as it associated with a finding. Just for your reference, that's not how the legislature asked us to focus the priority for home visiting expansion, but it may be useful for you in your thinking about whether you might apply or in an application, et cetera. So I'll drop that link in to help answer some of those questions. I believe DOH also has an opiate overdose dashboard that we could share as well for you all. But again, the criteria that we're sharing here is based on what the 6109 statute said is our kind of targeting criteria, if you will.
Ellie, I was just raising my hand on behalf of Erica because she's driving. So Erica.
Thanks, Liv. I just want to make a note that I remember when we discussed this bill previously, there was some concern raised that home visitors would be expected to be essentially substance use disorder counselors. And I wanted to share, and of course, DCYF team, please clarify, correct me. And hearing Dr. Ibarra speak to the Child Welfare Advocates Coalition that 6109 included a number of services for families. So home visiting is just one. So there are public health nurses, there's contracted childcare slots, etc. And my understanding from Dr. Ibarra is that they are planning to target all of these services in the same counties. So I think ideally the families would be enveloped, if you will, with a number of services, including home visiting. So I want to make sure this group knew that, if it might help in your consideration, if you're in one of those communities and you were thinking about applying, that families wouldn't just be only getting home visiting, that there are a number of services. And again, DCYF, please clarify if that has changed in the last 10 or so days. But that's what I heard Vicki share to a larger child welfare group. Thank you.
Erica, I think that's accurate. I think the limitation may be funding, and how much funding each community gets may or may not. So some communities may get more and some less on that. So I think you're not wrong, except for there is a limited amount of funding in each category for the services.
Yep.
And Erica, I'm gonna just do one quick step back from the this to your prior question, because you're on the phone. Emily has dropped in the chat what the results of the votes were for expansion and related to startup and general expansion with a limited focus. So that's there as well. And just noting that it was not a clear consensus to not approve expansion startup. It was a can live with was kind of the majority vote there. So just wanted to loop back on that, but hearing both your verbal feedback and that in chat is helpful for us in our thinking. So just wanted to I know you're in the car, so you're probably not seeing that.
I'm sorry, Laura, I missed what you said. It was not a complete what?
The vote for startup expansion was there was, I think, only 3 that said did not approve. The rest were can live with or can move forward. with
Oh, got
that.
it.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Appreciate it.
So I think the next slide here is a poll. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to say before we launched that, but there you go. So if there is, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, Nellie, will you read the poll out loud?
Yes.
The choices thing.
In the procurement, do we include the whole geographic area has been identified or some? And if you're going to say some, we'd like to hear what your thoughts are on where we should focus.
And I just want to call attention, and I apologize, Erica. Like I said, I put in the chat counties, so it's a smaller list. And so if you were to go into the chat, you would see the list. And there's a little bit of overlap between the disproportionality counties and the high child maltreatment rate counties. I think the overlaps are Yakima, Spokane, Whatcom counties. So we saw those three counties fell on both lists, but the counties with the highest child maltreatment rates: Adams, Asotin, Clallam, Cowlitz, Grays Harbor, Lewis, Lincoln, Okanagan, Pacific, Ponderay, Skagit, Spokane, Stevens, Wahkiakum, Whatcom, and Yakima. And then highest disproportionality: King, Pierce, Thurston, Snohomish, Spokane, Whatcom, Yakima.
Renee,
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
just to confirm, so when this says the whole geographic area, is that including the disproportionality?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We've got a couple more, maybe 30, 40 more seconds. Okay, we're gonna end the poll. Are you seeing the results?
They're flashing up. There we go.
Is that up now? Sorry.
Yeah, so it looks like there's pretty much consensus to include the whole area that I listed, with a few abstentions. So
Okay.
I think we're running out of time, so I want to go through. I think we should, try to, the next one might be a little bit dicey of a conversation. Not sure if that's where the slides are going. So next slide.
Okay. And the next slide.
Nellie, I have to jump off right at noon, and I'm sharing the slides. Do you mind pulling them up? Sorry.
Yep, I'll pull them up here. Thank you. So if you're gonna stop, and then I can share.
I think the next slide deck has to do with model. Thanks, Emily.
Yes.
And so as you all know, we're going to show you those models. We fund currently 9 models through the HVSA, and so we wouldn't change that list in the sense of expanding it. The question we have to you is this list should we offer SB 6109 expansion to all 9 HVSA funded models? And I was hoping, and I'm not sure that it happened, that you all would have received a description of those models.
Sorry if I make people dizzy here a little bit.
That's okay.
Close your eyes if you get dizzy by stuff moving pretty quickly. Oh, too far now.
There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
And yeah, so basically, what's your guidance on the appropriateness of offering all models the opportunity to serve this specifically focused client population? And the only thing I did was differentiate who's in rates and who's out of rates. It doesn't mean they should or shouldn't be eligible. I just wanted you all to know where we stood with the rates in terms of when we go forward with this. If that may or may not impact your advice to us, but it's really about the appropriateness of the model for the population. I was really hoping to have time for a pros and cons conversation from you all, but I'm not sure that we have that time. So.
Cassie, please go ahead.
Given the lack of time to have a hearty discussion, I don't know if it's possible to include in the application a question or something that asks the applicant to really provide kind of like a thorough understanding of how their model is a good fit for addressing that. Just a thought.
Thanks, that's a good idea.
Go ahead, Lee.
I'm assuming that people are already dealing with families that are impacted by opiates and are using now. And so I'm just kind of wondering, if I was applying, like what is it clear what I would be doing differently, or what I would be expected to be doing differently than what we're already doing now? Because it feels like when I talk with, my experience of talking with home visitors that are already trying to figure out resources and services for families, is it clear, and is the expectation clear of what would be expected of folks if they're applying for this that's different from what they're actually doing right now?
So I don't envision there being anything different for the families that they're doing. I think it's the way that they're coming into the program. So the referral pathway, I think, is what would be different maybe for some places, because I know that there are programs that are working really well with their child welfare agencies, and so this is just may not be that big of a difference in regards to how families are coming into their program or being referred out. But that would be what I would see is kind of being the difference, is the pathway by which families come into those specific programs. But I don't think that there'd be anything that our home visiting programs would be doing significantly different than what they're already doing right now to support families who already meet the criteria that are being identified here.
And the assumption is that we'll provide.
Oh, Laura, you cut out.
Their model expectations remain the same.
I think we missed the first part of what you said, Laura, unless it was just me.
Sorry. The headphones. Can you hear me now, Nellie?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thank you.
And I was just saying that we, with the training dollars, will be providing training to support equipping staff to be able to work and meet the unique needs, but their model expectations remain the same. That's the only thing.
Thank you for that, Laura. That's important. Christy and then Katie.
Yes, I wanted to know if there's going to be like laid out in the time period where people are applying for this, that there will be teams established, because we've mentioned here at the table that there would be other people in the community that, say in my case, home visitors, would be able to know that there would be a team that they will work with within the community, that it's not just relying on their home visiting. Will that be clearly established in like the RFP, so that we know every community that gets selected is going to have, say, 4 different entities working together as a team, as a pilot?
Nellie,
I
would
think-
you like? Oh.
Well, I was just gonna say, yeah, Nellie probably should answer this. I think what you're outlining, Christy, is an ideal world scenario. And I don't know that I think everybody is kind of running these processes concurrently. And so we're not gonna know if there's a team until we see how everybody, kind of how it all works out in the end. But I don't know, Nellie or Laura, if you have I don't know that we know the answer to that question.
Well, and could that be established as part of this prevention mode, that we know best practice, that, you know, we're going to have several players at the table so that we don't end up having teams take on funding and then it just becomes a real nightmare? Because I mean, I work in an agency that has a clinic, and so I kind of watch from the periphery, but there are a whole lot of other things that a typical PAT program may not come into contact with. And so really having a clear understanding for people, I think, before they apply, because it could be really, really difficult on home visitors. Could there be conversation, I guess, of this, you will
Yeah. Christy,
create
I
your
don't-
team?
Yeah, I don't know that we can require a creating of a team, but I think you've raised a really important point. And so Nellie and Renee, I'd like for us to bring this feedback back into DCYF to connect with our colleagues who are working on the other initiatives funded by 6109 to explore Christie's idea. But given there wasn't a specific requirement for establishing community-based teams, I'm not sure to what extent we can require that, but I do think it's a really important point you've raised, and maybe some work we can do internally to try to elevate the need and possibility for coordination at the community level with these funds.
Awesome. Awesome. I love to hear that.
We had Katie and then Nina.
Well, I think the conversation we had has been great and really helpful. I guess I would say, in regards to this specific question about the model eligibility, it seems to me that it would be a mistake to exclude a model from this conversation, considering, for example, I know here in King County, there's a PAT program that has built in some mental and behavioral health supports around the work that they're doing. And so even if PAT maybe is not the right, it seems like obvious that we don't know all those circumstances. And so putting parameters based on model, when some agencies may be really well poised to do this work, we can dream, right? Would be a mistake.
Thank you, Katie. Nina, and agreed. We had the same thought, but we wanted to have an opportunity to hear from all of you.
Okay, I know I'm off camera, but I've been shaking my head yes a lot to what everyone is saying. I just wanted to offer a perspective from the workforce and from the training thing, because we are coordinating the training effort with the expansion as well, and thinking about how I just wanted to say that when I'm thinking about home visiting programs, I'm thinking of them as being one of the supports that is embodied in the child welfare services via this law. And then I heard reference earlier to public health nurses, and there are another example. The public health nurses are really are called out in that bill, not in the context of home visiting. They're called out in the context of supporting child welfare staff. And so, I just wanted to make sure that that was sort of, since that had been brought up in the context of home visiting, I wanted to clarify that that likely is what I would imagine that Vicky Guevara was talking about. But Christy, in terms of thinking teams or community, part of the RFP we're developing, we're looking for capacity to do both, you know, virtual and deliver multiple ways of delivering services, but we may do community-based services in those target areas or community-based trainings that we can then pull together references and support the capacity of the teams within that context to support home visiting and or to support substance use. The other thing was I wanted to really quickly say too is that we really, the mandate through all of this, and we keep talking about the child safety, is that identification of current use in the family of opioid and fentanyl, and mitigating child safety risks. And so there may be certain trainings that might be parameters within the people who are bidding for services, such as that they either have had training or would do our training on how to identify and assess risk within the home, so that it's meeting the intent of the bill. And I don't know if that helps a little bit better in terms of understanding. And then I just want to also echo what Laura said. Yes, you're providing the home visiting services, and in the context of your model as well.
So I just want to take a couple of minutes and just share with you the referral process, because I saw that. And then I think we'll wrap up with a poll, because there's a couple of us that have to hop off onto another call here at 12:15. But I do want to be able to share kind of the referral pathway, because I did see something in the chat about there being a concern about referrals coming specifically from child welfare. And hilariously, I was about to ask somebody to advance the slides that I am the one that has right now. And they're not moving, so we'll come back to that. Oh, sorry, this is you, Renee.
Well, the purpose of this slide was just to say that our recommendation, since this is a pilot with, you know, we're not sure if we're hoping that we'll have continued funding in the next round, and it is a pilot with all this new things we're talking about, that we were recommending that we limit the scope of expansions to basically one caseload. And I wrote up here what the caseloads are for each of the models. And so basically, if someone was thinking about using SB 6109s or applying for those funds, if you're a nurse, you would apply for one nurse. And that would, you may have costs that are bigger than that, but that the scope of the application would be I have 22 there. I should have put the 2 in red, because the caseload for NFP is a little bit up for grabs right now. It's not up for grabs. It's just, there's some shifting happening at the model level. So I just plugged a number in there, and I meant to make it not a different color, just to say we're not sure what it is. But so basically the idea here is that was our recommendation, that we, and I can do the poll for that later. Now, Nellie, you can go back, you can do the pathways, and then, sorry, we're all over. I'm trying to see if I don't think I have a meeting at 12:15, so.
And can we commit to follow up with the poll after the meeting, Nellie, because several folks have had to hop off. So I'm thinking we might just need to do the polls over email.
Let's do that.
Yes, we can do that. So for the referral pathway, and this will be the last piece, I'm so appreciative of those of you who have gifted us 15 more minutes out of your day. So one of the other asks in this legislation was for us to develop a referral pathway. And so we partnered with the team that is working on the Family First Preservation Services Act, FFPSA, to develop a pathway. So they supported us in the creation of a pathway. There's one community-based pathway that we're not going to be utilizing, but these referrals are going to be generated from within child welfare. Again, because of the criteria that the legislation has centered around the specific case stages in a case that can be referred into 6109. So we also have child welfare early learning navigators within the child welfare system, and we have them in most of the counties that we've identified to have procurement go through. So they would be supporting this referral pathway. So here's the flow. And we also are thinking through kind of how Within Reach would be involved and connected with this. So this is the beginning of a referral process. It hasn't been completed yet, but you could see Title 40 agency would be a child welfare in this instance. And so they would identify the client. They are working on a prevention plan that hasn't been kind of put in, and it's not a part of 6109. So when the client has been identified, then there would be a referral to the home visiting programs that are identified through the procurement process that we would then make known to the child welfare agencies. So that would be kind of the referral pathway. And we're still thinking through kind of, as I talked about, the child welfare early learning navigators and how they would be connected to this and how Within Reach would be connected to this as well. But this just gives you a flow. And this flow is set up to support both FFPSA, which is the Family First Preservation Services Act. When that is up and running, they'll be using the same pathway. So there are several things on here that don't particularly pertain to 6109, but will pertain to FFPSA. Yep. All right. So with that, we will follow up on the last polls that we were unable to complete via email and give people an opportunity to follow up with that. The slides were put into the chat and we'll be sending them out. It's going to take us a little bit to send out the information. We have several people who are on leave after today, so it'll probably be the first week in September when we'll have the follow-up information from this HVAC meeting and out to everybody.